Coogs House. We are wrapping up the holidays and heading into the new year, and some new big players are heading to some new conferences potentially. What's going on out there and why Houston has to care?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hitter who can step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can lay us on Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. That's where you found us. It is so good to see you again. Remember to hit subscribe down below because we're doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers. Next one of those big markers is at 2,000. We're rapidly approaching it, so hit subscribe to help us get there. And like and comment on the video to let us know you're in that contest. We'll be happy to give away something when we get to 2,000. We're still figuring out what that is. But if you're talking all about the big deals with conference realignment, you just don't know what to say in today's episode. You just don't know what to comment down below. Tell us, what is your favorite flavor of Pop-Tarts? All right, so today's episode's got a number of different things to talk about. We're talking about conference realignment once again, and the way that this will impact Houston. I'm promising you that will be why you should care about this, will be covered in this show. But first, we got to cover like a surface level, what is going on with Florida State and the ACC and people making fun of SMU and all of those kinds of things. That's the first segment. Second segment is the impact that has on the Big 12, because that's probably the more immediate, more prescient impact that Houston has to care about. And then third and final, bigger picture about why Houston has to care about what is happening out there in the bigger picture with college athletics and these realignment stories. But first, as it is December 27th when this is being released, a few days ago at this point, last Friday, Florida State officially filed suit to sue the Atlantic Coast Conference, which they'd called home for more than a couple decades at this point. And they filed suit against the ACC as an antitrust suit with a breach of contract and a handful of other things. The big citations in the lawsuit were that the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, punishments are unenforceable per Florida law. The ACC offers unenforceable penalties under Florida law. The ACC materially breached their contract with Florida State and others, and the ACC breached their fiduciary duties with Florida State and others. The GOR, the grant of rights, is unenforceable, and that the ACC punishments further are, quote, unconscionable. The biggest piece of news that came out of this suit, though, as far as like news gathering goes last Friday, is that I don't think, and I say that someone who did a lot of following of the conference realignment stuff last summer, when a lot of hats are being handed out and passed around with the Big 12, I don't think people realize necessarily this big ACC contract. We all have been putting 2036 as the end date on it because that's when it ends with Fox and CBS and ESPN and so on. I guess it should just say Fox. Because in 2027, ESPN can back out of whatever ACC deal they want to. And ESPN could also re-up to be in the exact same deal. If they wanted to pay $0 more for the exact same amount of dollars per year, they could re-up in 2027 and go to 2020 to 2036 at the exact same dollar amount. So, as Florida State points out, that means, well, it's kind of assumed that's going to be a valuable product in 2027 that everyone's going to want to take part of, that ESPN's going to pay the exact same dollar amount because it's a great value for them for in 2027. They certainly don't have to, and there certainly is a world out there where they won't, and theoretically, the ACC could be making a lot less money in 2028 very, very quickly without those ESPN dollars. Now, again, wide assumption is that they would. Why wouldn't they? It's a great deal for them, a bargain deal for them by that point. But, you know, the big deal here is that they're suing, Florida State is suing to get out of the ACC as soon as possible because, frankly, the if they just paid their way out and didn't want to talk to lawyers or anything, it'd be $572 million at least to leave immediately because of the way the guaranteed rights worked. Now, the guarantor, the grant of right works guarantees a minimum payment at the present day of $572 million to leave at this moment. I think it's interesting, though, this issue brings up a lot of discontent with the conference for Florida State, and it's getting tied a lot to Florida State going 13-0 in the ACC and missing the college football playoff and missing out on the big payday that comes from making the CFP, right? And there's this feeling that, like, had they just made the CFP, who knows what would have happened. I can look at these documents right now. This was not written since that committee made that decision. This has been in the works for clearly a while. This is not a new rushed process. They've thought this through and laid this out and had the legalese of this figured out for a while now, right? So I don't think that's true. I think this has always been the direction they wanted to get to. They just maybe had some more fuel to the fire added to it. You could argue maybe they expedited the last month of it. Maybe they're going to wait till after the season or something. I don't know, but they definitely had been working on this well before missing the college football playoff. So that's a misnomer by a lot of people out there right now. I thought it was interesting in the legal contract and talking about what the ACC as a conference has done wrong, what the ACC as a conference has done that hurts Florida State directly. They cited a hotly contested vote last September to add 3 new members, Cal, Stanford, SMU. And instead of increasing the value of its existing members in the media rights, they added those 3 members, right? They're talking about diminishing the slices of the pie, and they took schools that don't add anything to the conference, and they talk about the financial value of the conference not being serious enough to add Oregon State and Washington State that add real financial value to the conference. Instead, they're adding Cal, Stanford, SMU, which I thought was a hilarious side note to this, that SMU being one of the 3 schools added is being used as an actual reason that the conference itself is not trying to be competitive and not putting the schools in the best situation possible. They used that example. It's hilarious. It's really, really funny. They ultimately, though, did wrap with this finally became necessary due to unwillingness by the ACC and some of our fellow conference members to seriously consider remedies to this situation, and then sent a memo to their fans that the ACC's underperformance has locked FSU and other ACC schools into an inferior broadcast contract. We knew that part. That leaves them with less revenue, visibility, prestige, and leverage than other Power 4 conferences. It's nice to be one of the other ones. As a result, the ACC will soon be tens of millions of dollars behind other Power 4 conferences, a gap that will widen over time, but FSU at a distinct disadvantage in the national competition for dollars to fund institutional advancement and appear in the most elite athletic championships. Meanwhile, the ACC's grant of rights and severe withdrawal penalty prevent FSU from exploring its fundamental right to realign with another conference, and thus capture the full market value of its own marquee brand. The combined effect of these draconian measures, draconian's the word they're using, would cost a member $572 million to leave. FSU's leadership has tried repeatedly to resolve these issues with the ACC, but we have been met with inaction. This legal action has become necessary as it is painfully apparent that the Florida State athletic ambitions and institutional priorities are no longer being served by ACC leadership. We derelict in our duty if we did not act. Now, that's a long way to say they had to do this. They didn't have other options. They didn't think there was any other way out of this. Now, that is going to have a domino effect, a ripple effect, if you will, that will bleed into the Big 12. But if you're, a gambling person that's trying to take picks on where you think Florida State is headed, you're probably also the type of gambling person that thinks you can make a great choice this weekend. And I'm here to tell you, if you're going to make some great choices this upcoming football weekend, the place to do it is at FanDuel, because as the weather is getting colder, NFL offers staying hot at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Right now, this weekend, they have Houston as a home favorite. Money line's at minus 184 to beat the Tennessee Titans for a second time this season. No, I don't think they'll be wearing those Oiler uniforms, but I do think it'd be nice to stick it to them once more in the divisional matchup. So make sure you go put your money where your mouth is at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right. So I mentioned that this does have a big ripple effect on the Big 12. The Big 12 is one of the other three power conferences. Pac-12, for all intents and purposes, I guess we can go ahead and call it dissolved. I guess they are wrapping up their last year as a full-fledged conference currently, but that's not what we're talking about here. As you look at the way that Florida State is treating the ACC, frankly, I want to point out a couple things in how this ties to the Big 12. First, Florida State is doing this because they've got some sort of a fledgling from some conference that they're in, right? I don't know if that's your mark, I don't know if that's Sankey, I don't know who that is, but you don't just do this lawsuit if you're Florida State without some knowledge that you're in a conference when you're out of the ACC, right? That's not going to happen. It wouldn't make any sense. So someone inside of Florida State has already talked to other conferences about how they would do in getting in. Now, I see some people that are tied to Florida State saying that the answer is the Big Ten, right? Big Ten would get their foothold somewhere in the Southeast. Adds a great football school, adds a legacy football school in a lot of ways, all that jazz. The big thing that's interesting to me there is it's not a written rule in the Big Ten, but it is an unofficial rule. It looks like the Big Ten has to have, or schools in the Big Ten typically have, AAU status. I mean, they're like in the elite version of academic institutions across America. We've talked about that in a previous episode, but you can go back and check the catalog when we talked about could Houston ever end up in the Big Ten once upon a time. It's essentially it's a club you have to be asked to join, but where you're recognized as a strong academic institution. And we've heard Renu Couture talk about wanting Houston to be in that club. Florida State's not in it yet. And the rest of the Big Ten basically would be, right? Not all of the Big Ten. I see you nodding your head there. Not all of them, but most of the Big Ten is. Certainly the legacy members are. And adding Florida State would kind of buck the trend there, kind of head them in the wrong direction as far as having that hoity-toity, nose-uppity sense about their academics in that conference. So it would be a move away from that in a way that I'm not so sure they want to go down. But they could. And frankly, the other part of that is that they could offer them a similar kind of deal, I'm sure, as they just offered Oregon and Washington, which is half as much as a lot of Big Ten schools, but still more than the Pac-12 or ACC schools are getting with the flexibility that is the Big Ten, because their deal is up well before 2036, right? And so on. I get that, but I don't know that that's it. The SEC currently has their feet in the state of Florida with the University of Florida, right? As far as the northern part of Florida, right? If you're getting up to more regionality than state locales, they've got Georgia, they got Alabama, they got Mississippi. They don't need any of that either, right? And so you run into this deal where Sankey has said that they in the SEC only want the 16 they've got. Now he's allowed to change his mind, but they don't really have any need for Florida State in the same kind of way. I don't see that as something that they're just dying to go do. And presumably this be throwing some slice of your pie or some piece of your money at a school that doesn't add a lot if you're the SEC to your conference. It just doesn't. It adds another school that's a lot like the schools you've already got. And so the SEC to me does not seem like a reasonable option here. The Big 12, that's us. Now, does the Big 12 in Florida? Yes, we got Central Florida, so we're in the state. But it's not the same thing. And frankly, Central Florida, from a program legacy perspective, is not the legacy that Florida State has athletically, right? So there's that bit. Second, as we know, the Big 12 wants to go coast to coast. We could also see the Big 12 being the kind of place that says, like, within those coastal regions, we now have multiple East Coast schools that can all play each other in a division or pod. We have multiple Four Corner schools who play each other in division or pod, right? Texas schools can play each other in division or pod, right? It makes some sense there. It makes a whole heck of a lot of sense there. Regardless which one it ends up being. I think the more interesting way to go about this is if not only has Florida State contact other schools, but if they're leading this charge to disintegrate the ACC, doesn't it make sense that they're probably not doing it alone, right? They're not the only ones screwed by all of the points they're bringing up about the ACC. Frankly, good friend of theirs, Clemson, a big-time football power the last 10 years, would make some sense, right? In the state of South Carolina, a state that the Big 12 is not currently in, a state that the Big Ten is not currently in, right? I guess the SEC has the University of South Carolina, but it's not in the state. It's not in the state in the same way it's in the state of Florida because of the same regionalities, right? You could also tie it to, North Carolina and North Carolina State. Now, it does look like UNC and NC State are tied in the same way that we at one point thought Arizona and Arizona State were. There's some of that going on within the state of North Carolina, but that's a state that, frankly, each of the other power conferences would be eager to get into. The blue blood there is North Carolina basketball, so it's a little bit different financial equation. But is Florida State talking to them about package deals of sorts? Virginia Tech, Virginia, kind of the same boat too, right? So you're looking at, okay, if Florida State's doing this, they're probably not doing it alone because that's be a really big leap, even if you knew where you're probably going to land to do on your own, right? And so Florida State, you have to imagine, has some faith that other people are going. Big 12. Now, while it'd be great to add North Carolina State, Florida State, etc., I think the more realistic play here is that, honestly, as you've added Cincinnati, about a decade ago, you added West Virginia. Now you go get Louisville. You go get Pitt. You go get Virginia Tech. You go get these other schools already near those schools. Pitt and West Virginia already got a rivalry, right? Cincinnati, Louisville, already a fun time. Like, those are already set up for you, and they're in new states, and they're in new regions, and they grow your conference, and we know there's nothing too big for Brett Yormark to handle, right? So that's where I see the more immediate factor is, like, once those dominoes start falling, Brett Yormark's going to start just snatching things up, right? Like, that's going to be very, very, very quick along the way here. I'm intrigued once this all settles by the University of Miami. Now, Miami is a private school in South Florida, has rivalries athletically with Florida State and Florida, but moves and has always moved very differently. They've got football history, even if it feels like flashes and pans to some people. But they've got football history for sure. It's in a football recruiting hotbed in the same way, frankly, that Houston is a football recruiting hotbed that has been pilfered by other universities. Miami has a football recruiting hotbed in South Florida that has gone through its waves of being pilfered as well by other schools, right? Miami, much like the SEC would want Florida State, I don't think the SEC would want to go down to the southern tip of Florida. They already have Florida schools, right? Miami, I could see you're talking Big Ten deals, but also I could see how, scheduling conference trips across, Ann Arbor to the University of Miami and so on. Plus, we also know that some of those 80s rivals and things like that maybe went some south some kind of ways. I said to say that I weirdly see Miami potentially being a Big 12 school when that all is said and done from a lot of different perspectives. If the ACC were to fall apart, I don't think they're going to move with Florida State. I think if I were a betting man, I'd put my money on Florida State making it to the Big Ten without joining the AAU. And that would kind of leave Miami as the Big 12 foothold in those 3 legacy programs in Florida. I'd be really, really into it for a number of different reasons. But anyway, I'd be looking at that, especially with Miami's, growing basketball program, the Big 12 being like the, monumental basketball conference that it's creating these days. I would look at that for sure. But that's not even necessarily to say that that's exactly the most tied to Houston way that this whole thing works. So as we talk about how this whole thing unfolds and why it matters to the University of Houston, we do have to remember a couple things here. One, as this is unfolding, we're looking at this happening in the next 24 months, right? Even if the decision is made before the new year, it likely doesn't impact anyone until like the fall of 2025 at the absolute earliest, right? So that's the first thing, is that this is at the 2025, 2026-ish window here that we're looking at these things happening. And frankly, the goal is, in a more localized way, for Houston to be looking to compete nationally by then. Now, I know that it seems fast, but work with me here. We're flipping things around. We're turning things around. Willie Fritz has got the football program moving, right? You do as well as we're doing, I think, in some last-minute resources and efforts in the 2024 classes. Boom, you're good, right? 2024 season happens, but you give Willie Fritz a full year of recruiting, a full year of transfer portaling, a full year of pulling people in. So next season we go, let's say 6-6, 7-5. We'll see, we'll talk more about that as we get there. Well, let's say we get 6-6. Then Willie Fritz gets his full set of class of kids, including a bunch of portal kids to help get the program off the ground and moving. You look at 2025, those kids we just got, although that great high school group we had in 2023 and 2022, those kids that have stayed and gotten developed and things like that, all of those things, by the time you get to 2025, 2026, you're looking at dominoes stacking up where, Houston should be as good as they've been in a long time from a talent perspective. Then you add in they've got a couple years under Fritz and his coaching staff that we know develops programs. Now, I understand, I can see you nodding. Stop it. The Tulane thing took him a minute to get going. I get that. We're also not in the same place that Tulane was when he took that program over. So I don't think it's going to take that same length of time either. College football also has things happening faster now than it did then, right? Turnarounds happen fast because things like the transfer portal, multi-time transfers are now apparently just a thing that get to happen, and so on, right? So that's all happening. I think the realistic part of this for Houston is that once these things are taking effect, the seasons these things will be happening in are at the same time as Houston trying to be relevant and competitive at a national level, right? Like top of the Big 12, it's a 12-team college football playoff. Why not us kind of competitive? I'm optimistic. I always am. But bear with me. I think that that's not out of the realm of possibility. I think it's worth paying attention to because it's so possible. Second, this is building a college football landscape that will look unlike anything we've ever seen. We have, a year ago, 5 power conferences. We're looking at potentially a year and a half from now having 3. Things are shrinking. Things are dwindling. Money is being consolidated. The sport is having a muffin top effect, cream rising to the top, whatever you want to call it. Things are overflowing at the top, but things are also being lost at the bottom. Houston has a number of different things that naturally work in its favor. It is the large public institution with all of the gumption that brings in a large recruiting hotbed that is as good as anywhere in America, and in any given year is the best recruiting hotbed in America. And frankly, a lot of the last handful of years have been the best recruiting hotbed in America, right? That's across all sports. That's not just football. That's not just basketball, folks. That is everything. As you're building an athletic program, you could not pick a better place than Houston because of the city, surrounding area, etc. Houston is also in a flourishing city from a just like place for college kids to live perspective. It's a growing city. People are flocking to Texas to build their businesses. Kids, why would you not want to go to school in the metropolis that is Houston, all the opportunity that that brings, right? That's a real thing. You have, we're seeing the bleeding effect of the great Houston basketball program and other athletic things. We have multiple coaches, whether that's Coach Rear in volleyball or Coach Willie Fritz at his press conference with football, talking about like how that is inspiring to where this program can be in any sport. That's the upside. As this thing is growing, this thing that is college athletics is growing, and the money is being consolidated, that means the number of teams that get to slice of that pie is shrinking. Washington State and Oregon State got left out. If the ACC implodes, what happens to those schools that get left out? And the Big 12 is next. We can't be a program that gets left out. Now, I know that that's hard to hear because in the 90s, we got left out. When the Big 12 was created and the Southwest Conference dissolved, Houston got left out. And I think there was some malicious play, some intentional things happening there. I really do. But if this is being sped up and this were to happen slowly but surely over the next 36 months, or by the end of that TV contract, we're all renegotiating in 2030, even let's say we got 5-6 years. Houston's got to build to a place very quickly in that span where they're not the one getting left out. Be irreplaceable. Be the one wanted. Be the school that the other conferences have to go get. Right now, I think there's a very clear path for Houston to do it. I'm not negative Nancy, Debbie Downer saying it can't happen. But I do think that the ACC dissolves less than a full calendar year from the Pac-12 dissolving. There's no reason to think that it can't happen in the Big 12 too. And the goal has to be able to be strong enough, be big enough, be valuable enough that you can be involved in whatever is next. I think we got the people to do it. I think Couture said the right things. I think Pesman has said the right things. I think the university has done several things to this point that they are that kind of serious. They're putting money into the buildings themselves. They're putting new facilities up. That's important, right? Frankly, they fired a football coach that cost a lot of money to do so because it wasn't competitive enough. That financial move, having the stones to do that, shows that you are a program, an athletic program, not just a football program, but an athletic program ready to do that, right? All of these things work in conjunction with one another to show that Houston can be and should be one of those programs. Now, it's time to continue that because you just, as we've seen with the ACC, never know what can happen. Now, if you think I'm off my rocker, if you think I'm just being looter, if you think I'm being ridiculous, tell me in the comments down below. Bring it on. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. Locked On Coogs is a private Locked On podcast network. That means your team, our team, are Coogs. Willie Fritz's Coogs, Pesman's Coogs, Kelvin Sampson's Coogs every day. We're doing some more basketball later this week. All kinds of fun stuff in the podcast. Locked On Coogs, your number one daily Houston Cougar podcast. Locked On Coogs, primary Locked On podcast network. That means our Coogs every day. Go Coogs.